AI Artificial Intelligence is one of the strangest movies in Steven Spielberg's entire filmography. And honestly, I don't think that's even up for debate. This is a movie that is famously tied to two very different filmmakers. It was originally developed by Stanley Kubrick for years, and after Kubrick passed away, Spielberg ended up directing it. And you can feel that tension all over the movie. This does not feel like a pure Spielberg movie, but it also does not feel like a pure Kubrick movie. It feels like Spielberg trying to honor Kubrick while still making something that fits his own emotional instincts. And the result is messy. Interesting, sure, ambitious, yes, sometimes beautiful and sometimes deeply uncomfortable, but definitely messy. The basic idea is a futuristic version of Pinocchio, but instead of wooden puppet who wants to become a real boy, we have a robotic child who wants to become a real boy so his mother will love him. And on paper, that seems like a very Spielberg idea. A child longing for family, wanting unconditional love, trying to find his place in a world that doesn't fully accept him. That sounds like something Spielberg could absolutely turn into a heartbreaking masterpiece. But the movie itself is much colder and creepier than that premise suggests. And I know the movie is technically science fiction, but for a good chunk of the runtime, I kept asking myself, are we sure this wasn't originally supposed to be a horror movie? Because the score, the color grading, cinematography, the way David is framed, the way he moves through the house, the way he just appears in scenes, so much of this plays like psychological horror, especially in the first 20 or 30 minutes. Every time David popped up in the background or whispered something, I was expecting a horror movie jump scare music to kick in. There are so many moments where he just looks at someone or stands in a doorway or says something in a quiet voice, and it feels like that movie is about to reveal this robot child is actually evil. And to be fair, I do not blame Haley Joel Osment for that. He is a very good actor and he's doing what the role requires. But I do think the performance comes off as creepier than the movie intended. He feels less like a sweet artificial child and more like a creepy kid you would see in something like Insidious or one of those horror movies where a child is secretly the villain. Every time he whispers, it has that haunted child in the hallway energy. There's a scene early on where David is just trying to understand the family and connect with Monica, but the way it's shot makes it feel unsettling instead of sympathetic. Again, I understand what the movie's going for. David is not fully human, he's learning behavior, he's trying to imitate love. The discomfort is probably intentional to some degree, but the problem is the movie also wants us to emotionally attach to him, and that's harder when half the time he feels like he wandered in from a haunted house movie. That is one of the big issues with AI for me. I understand the concept, but the execution keeps pulling me in different directions. The first hour is basically a sci-fi drama with horror undertones. David is brought into this family as a replacement child because their real son is in suspended animation due to illness. That setup is actually really compelling. You have grieving parents, artificial intelligence, moral questions about love, and the terrifying idea of creating a child you can love forever, even if you're not prepared to love him back. That part of the movie has some really strong ideas. It asks uncomfortable questions. Is it ethical to create a child robot that can love? What happens if the humans stop wanting him? Does a robot's love count if it was programmed? And if a machine can suffer emotionally, does it matter whether that suffering is real in the human sense? Those are fascinating questions. But then the movie just kind of rushes through the world building. It introduces big ideas about the future, artificial humans, population control, robot rights, and human prejudice towards machines, but it's all very underdeveloped. The world is visually interesting, but the movie doesn't slow down enough to fully explain or explore it. And after the first hour, the movie suddenly becomes something completely different. David is abandoned, and the movie shifts into this weird, disturbing journey, the world of discarded robots, robot entertainment, robot destruction spectacles, and then this whole plot line involving a robot prostitute played by Jude Law. And that is where the movie really starts to feel like two different movies stitched together. On one hand, Jude Law is actually pretty good. He brings this stylized, almost cartoonish energy to the role, and visually his character is memorable. But the whole section with robot prostitutes and humans cheering as robots are destroyed is such a hard pivot from the first act that it almost feels like we changed channels. Suddenly the movie is less about a mother and child and more about prejudice against robots, exploitation, society's cruelty toward artificial beings. That material could work in its own movie. A story about robots being used, discarded, objectified, and hated by humans could be a really strong dystopian sci-fi film, but here it feels like it takes over the movie for a while, and David's emotional story gets buried under all the disturbing imagery. And this movie has a lot of disturbing imagery. The flesh fair sequence, where robots are destroyed for human entertainment, is genuinely unpleasant to watch. It's effective, but also feels like it belongs in a much darker movie. Again, this is why I kept coming back to the question, was this secretly supposed to be a horror movie? Because even when the movie is not scary in the traditional sense, it has a bleak, unsettling quality that makes it feel less like wonder-based science fiction and more like a nightmarish version of Pinocchio. And I do think that was probably the point. This is not meant to be some comforting fairy tale. It is Pinocchio, but filtered through a very cold sci-fi lens. but the tone is so inconsistent that I had trouble fully connecting with it. That being said, visually the movie is extremely impressive. For a movie that was released 25 years ago, it was definitely ahead of its time in some ways. The visual effects on the robots still hold up really well. The designs of the mechas are excellent. Some of the damaged robots look incredible, and the movie does a great job showing how artificial bodies can look almost human, but not quite. There are moments where the effects blend practical design, makeup, and digital work in a way that's still convincing today. The cinematography is also very striking. Even when I didn't know where the story was going, I was usually impressed by how the movie looked. Spielberg knows how to frame images, and this movie has some unforgettable visuals. The underwater city, the futuristic landscapes, the cold blue lighting, the sterile interiors, it all creates a very specific atmosphere. But again, that atmosphere almost feels more horror than it does sci-fi. The color grading is cold and eerie. The lighting makes the home scenes feel less warm and more haunted. Even the quieter emotional scenes have this uncomfortable edge to them. It's not a cozy Spielberg family drama, it's a very strange, icy, unsettling fairy tale. Then you have the robot teddy bear, who I guess was supposed to be like Jiminy Cricket. He's David's companion, and he follows him on the journey. He has a few memorable little moments, but honestly, he's pretty inconsequential to the movie. He's a cool idea, and the design is charming in a weird way, but he never becomes as important as he probably should. If this is supposed to be futuristic Pinocchio, then Teddy should feel like a strong emotional guide. Instead, he mostly just kind of exists. The biggest strength of the movie is that I genuinely could not predict where it was going, and that's rare. A lot of sci-fi movies, especially ones built around familiar fairy tale structures, are pretty easy to figure out, but the movie kept surprising me. Sometimes that was exciting, and sometimes it was confusing. Sometimes it felt like the movie itself didn't even know where it was going. But I was never bored in the sense of being able to guess every second. The final section of the movie is especially bizarre. Without getting too deep into spoilers, though it is a 25-year-old movie, the movie eventually goes so far beyond where it started that it almost feels like a different genre again. It begins as a story about a robot child and a family, turns into a dystopian road movie, becomes a futuristic Pinocchio quest, and then ends with this strange, almost dreamlike finale about memory, love, and the impossibility of getting back what you lost. And I respect the ambition of that, but I don't think the movie fully earned all of it. The emotional idea is powerful. A child who is created to love forever. It's trapped by that love forever. David's programmed makes him innocent, but it also makes him tragic. He cannot move on. He cannot grow up. He cannot accept that his mother's love was limited and complicated. He's stuck chasing an impossible dream because that's what he was built to do. And that is a haunting concept. When I think about this movie, I almost feel like I like it more than I did while watching it. The themes are strong, the ideas are strong, the visuals are strong, the performances are committed, but as an actual movie experience, it's very uneven. It feels like a mashup of two very different directors with two very different ideas. Kubrick's colder, more detached philosophical style is all over it, and at the same time, Spielberg's sentimentality and emotional sincerity are all over the ending. But instead of blending smoothly, those two styles often clash. Sometimes the movie wants to be cynical and disturbing, sometimes it wants to be heartbreaking and magical, sometimes it wants to be dystopian social commentary, and sometimes it wants to be a futuristic fairy tale. And because of that, I never fully knew how I was supposed to feel or react to the movie. I do think it deserves credit for being ambitious. It's not lazy or a cash grab, it's clearly trying to say something about love, humanity, technology, grief, and the danger of creating life just because you can. It has more ideas in one act than some sci-fi movies have in their entire runtime, but having a lot of ideas does not automatically mean the movie works. And for me, it's one of those movies where I admire the parts of it more than I enjoy the whole thing. It was ahead of its time when it came out, especially with the rise of modern conversations about artificial intelligence, emotional machines, and whether technology can imitate or replace human connection. But it does not feel as unique as it probably did when it came out. We've seen a lot more stories about robots, AI, synthetic humans, the line between programming and emotion. So now what stands out most is not necessarily how original it is, but how bizarre it is. And it is very bizarre. This is easily Spielberg's weirdest movie. Not his worst, but certainly his weirdest. It has moments of brilliance, beauty, horror, and moments where I honestly wondered what movie I was watching. The visual effects still hold up. Haley Joel Osment gives a commended performance, even if I found the character creepier than was probably intended, and the movie's futuristic Pinocchio concept is genuinely fascinating. But the execution of it is very messy. The tone is uneven, the world building feels rushed, some supporting elements like the teddy bear feel underused, and the shift after the first hour in robot exploitation and prejudice makes the movie feel like it's pulling itself apart. I am glad I watched it because this is one of those movies that is worth seeing just to understand how unusual it is. But I didn't love it. I respected it more than I enjoyed it. So for me, it gets a C, a 7 out of 10, and a 2.5 out of 5 stars. It's ambitious, visually impressive, and impossible to predict, but also cold, creepy, uneven, and too messy to fully work. Spielberg swings big here, and I respect the swing, but this is one of those swings that only half connects.